This moment in history was depicted in Peque Gallaga's Oro Plata Mata, but it was inspired by true events. On December 17, 1941, the SS Corregidor struck a mine and sank in just 5 minutes. There were more than 1,000 passengers on board, including doctors, athletes, and students trying to make it home for Christmas.
In the evening, there was news broke out that it sank. You know, hibi na to. My dad, my brother, and oh my God, they were already crying. In the middle of the night, they saw two very exhausted looking guys. And then instead of embracing them because they were alive, sinugata pa sila, they were met with, ay ngalinte. I thought you'd be happy because you were alive.
But for most people, they weren't this fortunate. Almost 1,000 people died that night. And both in the movie and in real life, this was a wake-up call for the people of Negros. It was finally proof that the foreign threat was coming to the south. And in the movie, families lived with each other to face the threat together. Something that was actually inspired by true events. This movie is always listed among the best Filipino movies of all time. But why? I mean, it's a movie set in the 40s, shot in the 80s, but is so relatable in the 2020s. Why? Because history keeps repeating itself. And that's why Oro Plata Mata is relevant in 2022. Let's get ready to rumble! This is my Tito Dwight. Officially, according to IMDb, he was the transportation captain of the movie. But he was also part of the cast. He was a singing guerrilla who also did this.
It was the most horrible week of my life. All the males took a bath naked in the bathhouse. And I came in late. And then si Joel said, "Oh, si Dwight too. Dako." The next day, Peque comes to me and says, "Wait, sila nila, dako ako daw." Yeah, so you have to get naked. No! I absolutely refused. And for 1 week, all of these guys ostracized me. Parang, grabe. Akala ko, for art's sake, what a prude. Okay. When we arrived there, that's when I realized it was the river right next to the farm na sa Normandia. Our farm.
Yeah.
There were about 200 na taga Normandia. Tuto Anthony, Tuto Dwight. And they all knew me.
The first time I ever watched Oro Plata Mata was during school. So obviously they cut out this part. But a few years later, I watched it again by myself and I was horrified. So when I watched it for the first time, when I watched it for the first time by myself, and then I saw your scene, I was like, okay, so here's Tito Dwight, and here's my Tito's privates. I mean, this was my Tito. Technically, he's my lolo. He's my lola's youngest brother. But the age gap is so big that my lola was actually there during the war, during the events that inspired Oro Plata Mata.
During the outbreak of the war, Lolo Using announced to all the relatives to go to his place since he has a very big mansion. We Gastons, if we die together.
So my ancestors stayed here. Plenty of room for everyone and lots of fun things for the kids to do.
So he was a very progressive kind of guy, Lolo Pangboy. That's a very American thing, the shoe house. He turned this house into a theme park for his kids.
So this shoe house has been here since before World War II. In the 80s, my mom used to play here. I used to play here in the early 2000s with my cousins. But in high school, I found out something else happened in this shoe house. And we turn on the movie, people are having sex in the shoe house.
So dito pala yun. Where we were rolling, somebody else was rolling around here.
But it wasn't just the setting that inspired the events of the movie.
Some of the things that happened in the movie paralleled what happened in that house. The idea of that the Japanese were coming and they were all panicking. It was true. your Lolo Ado,
Lolo Ado is your lolo, my great-great-grandfather.
your great-great-grandfather made this entire family kneel down because the Japanese were coming. They saw the whole town of Manakla was burning. They could see it burning. There was another mansion beside them in another farm. And if that thing burned, that means they were next. And the thing burned. And they knew the Japanese were coming. And he made his family kneel down, ready his pistol, because he was going to shoot all his daughters because they would get raped probably, then kill the sons, then kill himself. It was that bad.
And because of all these things, it made perfect sense for the Gastons to be in the movie also. Aside from my Tito, my Lola actually makes a cameo in the movie. Right here. But while they were shooting the movie in the early 80s and pretending to live it up in 1941, something else was happening to Negros. The sugar capital of the Philippines was getting less and less sweet. At its height in 1974, sugar exports alone were responsible for about 27% of all foreign profits of the Philippines. And because Negros was responsible for more than half of all sugar in the country, life was good. But by 1983, just 1 year after Oro Plata Mata was released, that number was down from 27% to 8%. So what happened? To find the answer, we need to go back to 1955, when the Magsaysay administration said yes to the Laurel-Langley Agreement, ensuring that the US would continue to purchase a set amount of sugar from the Philippines for almost 20 years. But in 1974, when Philippine sugar exports were at its highest, the agreement ended, and sugar exports from the US fell from 1.2 million tons in 1974 to just 333,000 tons in 1975. And to make matters worse, in 1974, Marcos used his martial law powers to establish a monopoly in the sugar industry, headed by his crony and frat bro, Roberto Benedicto.
RSB, Roberto Benedito, gave him an idea that, you could milk the sugar industry. They bought per pickle, that's one sack of sugar, from us planters, 180 pesos. And they were selling it at 600. So we really had to tighten our belts. Ang iba niya, they had to transfer their children from private schools to public schools because they could no longer afford.
From 1974 to 1983, the Washington Post reported that the sugar industry lost more than $1 billion. And I know what you might be thinking. Isn't this video about Oro Plata Mata? Ryan, why are you talking about Marcos and martial law? Well, you can't really separate these two things. Because in 2018, Imee Marcos dropped a comic book. Yeah, a comic book where she claimed that she was the producer for some of the best Filipino movies of all time, including Himala and, you guessed it, Oro Plata Mata. So, of course, I asked my Tito if this was the truth.
It's a yes and a no. There is what is called an executive producer who doesn't really do much except move the money. She was a producer in the sense that she owned ECP. Like Harvey Weinstein is a producer in that sense.
Yeah.
Of all the movies that were made under Weinstein Productions, but he wasn't necessarily the actual producer there every day.
The actual producers of the movie were Charo Santos and Peque's wife, Madeline Gallaga. But a third unofficial producer would be the collective people of Negros, who really wanted this movie to be made.
Half of the budget did not come from the producers, did not come from ECP. It came from the Negrenses themselves. Their jewelry, their furniture, the houses, they were free.
But in all fairness to Imee Marcos, she did help with the movie. She was able to use her Marcos dictator connections to get the police to protect the cast and crew from the NPA.
We always had the security ng mga from the military, crazed-looking men, bloodshot eyes. Almost killed one of my friends, Fergus Martir. Peque decided to shoot somewhere else naman. So we all had to move. And in the hurry, si Fergus had this pat-pat. And this guy was brooding, probably thinking about the battles he had just gone through. And si Fergus kind of patted him with the stick. Pak, 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 pak. Dulo kayo ha. Tinignan siya and then rode the jeep. When they arrived at the location, the guy cocked his M16 and was looking for Fergus because he was going to shoot him down.
What?
Wait, what? Bakit nga? Nakalmado lang. Things like that. Daming incidents na ganun.
Essentially, she solved a problem her father helped cause. We already talked about how badly the hacienderos suffered, but what about the farm people? The farm workers who were earning less than 30 pesos a day in 1986. And that's if you're employed. The sugar industry was so bad during this time that a lot of people weren't. And that's exactly what happened to Joel Abong's father. You might not know the name, but I'm sure you know this infamous picture, taken in 1985, during an era which Marcos Jr. now claims as the golden age of the Philippines. Around 74% of children under 15 were suffering from some degree of malnutrition. And the members of the NPA would use this to their advantage. They would actively go to farms to recruit workers. And when you and your family have no money and are starving, what do you have to lose? So it makes sense for the NPA to be all around Negros at this time, especially in Mambucal, where the entire plata, or silver, part of the movie was shot.
Plata, a time when the pleasures of life started fading away.
Sumuko na ang mga Amerikano sa Hapon.
Unfortunately, I wasn't able to visit Mambucal, but I was able to visit Araal in La Carlota, where they shot all the beautiful waterfall scenes, where Hermes encountered a diwata, and where they saw a dying Japanese soldier. This was honestly the hardest hike of my life, and I just kept thinking, how the hell did they get cast and crew and lights and microphones all the way up this mountain? But in the movie, these two locations were blended together to create the perfect place for the families to hide from the Japanese, away from the city. And this was where they started to slowly descend into madness, where we saw the message of the movie, that war changes everyone, where the trusted foreman Melchor kills all the helpers and even rapes the lady of the house. And when we watched the movie in school, we were taught that the actions of these bandits mirrored the actions of the abusive military during the time of martial law. But according to my Tito, this wasn't intentional.
At that time, I don't think so. Sometimes kasi like I do something, I write something, and I'm surprised later that some critics will interpret this profound breakdown and symbolism of yun pala yun. Sometimes people read too much or enough into it. Maybe we were not able to articulate it ourselves, but it was there in our work and it was left to other people to interpret it in an entirely new way and a valid way. Peque and I are the best of friends, so I would know if I would remember if he said this is a metaphor for It's how the audience interprets it and how history merely repeats itself in various ways. Everything that Oro Plata is about, all the themes and the conflicts are happening right now.
And we see this as a recurring theme not just in the movie, but in the history of the Philippines. Because Oro Plata Mata isn't about the struggle between the Philippines and Japan, even if it is set during the Japanese occupation. It's about Filipinos fighting other Filipinos. And the fact that when order breaks loose, even the most civilized people can turn into animals. And we see this in the character of Sherry Hill, where her childlike innocence was corrupted by the atrocities of war. Or with Joel Torres' character, where we see that even the kindest, most sheltered person can be consumed by rage and vengeance. And we saw this during martial law, when hungry people felt like they had no other option but to join the NPA. And we saw Filipinos kill other Filipinos, where even just the possibility of being a communist meant you deserved to be killed and tortured. And in 2021, the lack of jobs and government support during the pandemic turned Filipinos against other Filipinos as well.
Wala na mga trabaho, they were laid off. So what do? The easiest thing is to steal. Meron kami mga puppies, pinangalanan ko ng idol ko na si Elvis Presley. Yung pala, babae. So tinawag ko Elvisa. My son nabibreed siya ng mga fighting cocks muna. So, siguro interesado sila sa manok. The dogs were really barking like anything at night. Dahil sa gutom na nila, they poisoned the 3 puppies, si Elvisa. Oh my gosh, I really cried.
And when we think about all these things, there seems to be a pattern. During World War II, during martial law, and even today. Times have changed, but one thing remains the same. History repeats
itself. Will repeat and repeat. Tragedy of Pinoy against Pinoy. It's an entire populace that has been conditioned by several people.
And if we don't learn from these mistakes, we're just doomed to repeat them again and again and again. And this is why Oro Plata Mata is especially relevant in 2022. At the end of the movie, when the war is over, life kinda goes back to normal for the main characters. The movie ends where it began, during a party. But this time, we see these characters with their literal and figurative scars. Which honestly reminds me of today, when COVID is becoming more and more manageable. It feels like the end is in sight, but we're left with the scars of the people we've lost. Right now, we are living through a major historical event, just like a world war or martial law. But with the help of vaccines, we are nearing the end of the COVID era. But we are also nearing the 2022 presidential elections. So now, maybe more than ever, we need the right person to lead us through the next 6 years. We need someone who can steer us towards the right direction. That's why this year, we have the power to learn from history, to be aware of the mistakes of the past so we aren't doomed to repeat them.
That's why it is relevant until now, and hopefully it won't be anymore, but I can see it happening all the time, all the way into your grandson's generation. Because we need to learn lessons of history, and we need to learn that a lot of our conflict is between ourselves.
I mean, it's 2022 and it's still Filipinos versus Filipinos. DDS ka o dilawan ka at yun ka lang. When really, we're all Filipinos who want to make the country better. So please, research about your candidates. What have they done? What is their track record? At please, huwag na tayong bumoto na mga magnanakaw. So hopefully you enjoyed this video. It is honestly the most effort I've ever put in a video ever. But very fitting because it's my 100th video and I just hit 2,000 subscribers. So I want to thank you all for that. But moving forward, I don't know if I'll post every single Thursday anymore, but I'll try my best as much as I can. But while you're here, why not like, comment, and subscribe? And follow me on my socials. I am on Instagram at _Ryan Rosalia. You can like my Facebook page at facebook.com/Ryan Rambles or support me on buymeacoffee.com/Ryan Rambles. But till next time, peace and I love y'all. Hoy mga Pinoy, ito na ang medisina, nagbabagong apoy, linagyan ng gasolina, kaya't tinatanong pa ba kung kanino at sino ang tiyak na puntahan sa kulturang Pilipino? Ako na ang sagot, ang dakilang gamot.